the cold hours before dawn, when the ravens still sleep and the castle's stones remember the warmth of yesterday's sun, the old maester records a tale the great houses would prefer forgotten. It is a tale of two brothers, of fire and lies, and of the moment a boy learned that knights were no different from any other men who wore steel and claimed honor. The keep of House Clegane sat low and squat against the western hills, a ugly thing of grey stone that caught the morning mist and held it like a grudge. It was not Casterly Rock, with its golden banners and soaring towers. It was not even Lannisport, with its markets and music. It was a kennel master's holding, raised up by Tywin Lannister's grandfather for service rendered with hounds and loyalty. The Cleganes were dogs who'd been given a house, and they knew it, even if they pretended otherwise. Sandor Clegane was 8 years old the day his world burned. He woke that morning to the sound of his brother Gregor's boots on the stairs, heavy, deliberate, the tread of a boy already growing into something monstrous. Gregor was 12, but he had the size and strength of a man grown, and the temperament of a chained bull. Their father said it was a blessing from the seven, this size. Their mother, before she died, birthing a sister who'd lived only 3 days, had made the sign against evil when she thought no one was looking. "Get up, little dog," Gregor's voice carried through the door, rough even then. "Father wants the hounds fed before the hunt." Sandor rose from his straw mattress. Gregor had the feather bed. He was the heir, after all. And dressed in the dim light. Wool breeches, a tunic that had been Gregor's before he'd outgrown it, boots that pinched his toes. He was small for his age, a runt compared to his brother, but quick enough to avoid Gregor's fists, most days. The kennels stank of dog piss and old meat, but Sandor didn't mind. The hounds knew him, trusted him. They didn't care that he was the second son, the spare, the one who'd inherit nothing but a sword and a prayer. He moved among them easily, filling their bowls with the scraps from last night's table, checking their paws for thorns, murmuring the nonsense words that dogs seem to like. "Wasting your words on animals," Gregor said from the doorway. He filled it completely, blocking the morning light. "Father says you're to clean the stables after. I'm riding with Lord Lannister's party." Of course he was. Gregor was always riding with someone important, always being shown off like a prize bull. "Look at the size of him," the visitors would say. "He'll be a terror in the melee, a giant in the making." They never said it, where Gregor could hear the pride in their voices. That would have made it worse. "I don't mind the stables," Sandor said, keeping his voice flat. Gregor liked it when you showed fear or anger, fed on it somehow. "No, you wouldn't." Gregor stepped into the kennel, and the dogs that had been calm a moment before began to whine and shift. They knew. Animals always knew. "You like the shit and the mud, don't you? Like a proper dog yourself." Sandor said nothing. He'd learned that lesson too. Words were like coins. Spend them wrong and you paid for it. But silence was a coin too, and Gregor was in a mood to collect payment one way or another. The first kick caught Sandor in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He went down among the straw and dog shit, curling instinctively, protecting his head. The hounds erupted in barking, throwing themselves against their pens, but they couldn't reach him. Couldn't help. "Speak when I talk to you," Gregor said, almost conversational. Another kick, this one to the back. "Or are you too stupid? Maybe you really are just a dog." Sandor tasted blood where he'd bitten his tongue. The pain was sharp and specific, but he knew better than to cry out. Crying made it longer, made Gregor smile. "Gregor!" Their father's voice cracked across the kennel yard like a whip. "Lord Lannister's party is ready. Get yourself to the stables." Gregor's boot was drawn back for another kick, but he lowered it slowly. He bent down close enough that Sandor could smell the breakfast bacon on his breath. "We'll finish this later, little dog." Then he was gone, his footsteps receding toward the stables and the waiting horses and the lords who'd praise his size and strength. Sandor lay in the straw for a long moment, breathing carefully around his bruised ribs. The hounds had quieted, but he could hear their anxious panting. Slowly, he pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. Nothing broken. He'd had worse. He finished feeding the dogs. The day passed in a haze of familiar work, mucking stables, hauling water, mending a section of fence where the goats had broken through. The servants knew to leave him alone when he had that look on his face. The flat, empty expression that meant he was somewhere else inside his head. Somewhere Gregor's fists couldn't reach. By evening, the hunting party had returned with 2 deer and a boar, and the keep's small hall rang with laughter and the clatter of eating. Sandor took his supper in the kitchen with the servants, a bowl of stew and black bread, and tried not to think about the high table where Gregor sat beside their father, basking in Lord Lannister's visiting knight's attention. "Your brothers, to be sent to Casterly Rock," old Nan, the cook, said quietly, ladling more stew into his bowl unasked. "For training. Proper training with the master-at-arms there." Sandor said nothing, but something unknotted in his chest. Gregor would be gone. For months, maybe years. "You'll be the man of the keep, more or less," Nan continued. "Your father's getting old for the work. You'll have to step up." "I'm 8, Sandor said. "Aye, and your brother was breaking boys' arms in the training yard at 8. Nan's voice was matter-of-fact. "You're not him, thank the 7. But you'll have to be something when he's gone." That night, Sandor lay in his bed and imagined what the keep would be like without Gregor's shadow falling across everything. Quieter, maybe. Safer. He could work with the hounds properly, learn the things his father knew about breeding and training. Maybe he could even be good at something, be noticed for something other than being Gregor's smaller, weaker brother. He fell asleep with that thought, warming him like a brazier's coals. 3 days later, Gregor caught him in the armory. Sandor had been cleaning his father's old practice swords, working the rust from the blades with sand and oil, when the door scraped open. He looked up and knew immediately that something was wrong. Gregor's face had that flat, empty look that meant someone was going to bleed. "Father says I'm leaving tomorrow," Gregor said. "I heard." Sandor kept his hands on the sword, though it was dull and useless. "Casterly Rock. You'll be a knight." "I'll be a great knight." Gregor stepped further into the armory. The space suddenly felt very small. "Everyone says so. Lord Lannister's man said I could win the king's melee by the time I'm 16. "That's good," Sandor said carefully. "You know what else Father said?" Sandor shook his head. "He said you'd have to work harder, pull your weight, not be such a weakling." Gregor's huge hands flexed. "He said maybe you'd grow into something useful, but he doubted it." The words stung worse than the kicks had, but Sandor kept his face still. "I'll work, I always do. Not good enough." Gregor moved closer, and Sandor found himself backing toward the wall where the practice armor hung on hooks. You've always been not good enough, weak, soft, making the dogs love you because people won't. What do you want, Gregor? The question came out harder than Sandor had intended, with an edge of anger he usually kept buried. Gregor's eyes lit up like a dog that had just seen a rabbit bolt. I want you to remember something, Gregor said quietly, while I'm gone. I want you to remember who's the heir and who's the spare, who matters and who doesn't. Sandor's hand tightened on the practice sword, but it was a child's grip on a dull blade. Gregor could have taken it from him like a toy. Instead, his brother reached past him to the wall, where a brazier sat on its iron stand, kept burning low to warm the armory's damp air. There was a toy, Gregor said, conversationally, his hand hovering over the coals. A wooden knight, painted. Father gave it to me, but you took it. Do you remember? Sandor did remember. The toy had been his, given to him by a traveling merchant who'd admired his way with the hounds. Gregor had claimed it anyway, as he claimed everything, but Sandor had stolen it back, hidden it under his mattress. It was mine, Sandor said. Everything here is mine, Gregor replied. You just use it until I'm done with it. What happened next took perhaps 5 seconds, perhaps less, but Sandor would remember it in perfect detail for the rest of his life, would feel it in dreams and waking both, would carry it like a brand that never stopped burning. Gregor's hand shot out, impossibly fast for such a big boy, and caught Sandor by the back of the neck. The practice sword clattered to the floor. Sandor's boots scraped against stone as he was dragged forward, his hands clawing uselessly at Gregor's wrist. Let me go. The words became a scream as Gregor shoved his face into the brazier. The pain was beyond anything Sandor had imagined pain could be. The coals pressed against his cheek, his ear, his eye, and the world became nothing but fire and agony. He could smell his own flesh cooking, hear Gregor's breathing steady and calm above him, feel his legs kicking in useless animal panic. Then he was on the floor, and Gregor was backing away, and the smell of burned meat filled the armory. Sandor tried to scream again, but could only make a sound like a dying dog. His left side was a sheet of pain, his eye streaming tears or blood or fluid from the blistered flesh. He curled into himself, shaking, the stones cold against his ruined face. You fell, Gregor said calmly. The brazier tipped. You fell into it like a clumsy child. Through his good eye, Sandor saw his brother's face. There was no rage there, no emotion at all. It was like looking at a statue of a person, cold and perfect and empty. Father will ask, Gregor continued. You'll tell him you fell. You'll tell everyone you fell. Because if you don't... He let the threat hang unfinished. It didn't need finishing. Then Gregor was gone, and Sandor was alone with the pain and the smell of his own burned flesh, and the knowledge that the world was exactly as cruel as he'd always suspected it was. The servants found him eventually. They carried him to his father's solar, where the old man looked at his son's ruined face with something between horror and disappointment. The master was summoned from a neighboring keep. Clegane's keep was too small to warrant its own, and he worked with needle and thread and milk of the poppy while Sandor drifted in and out of consciousness. When his father asked what happened, Sandor croaked out the lie through cracked lips. I fell. The brazier. I fell. His father's relief was palpable. Gregor, standing in the doorway, smiled. 3 days later, Gregor left for Casterly Rock to begin his training as a knight. He'd return eventually, bigger and stronger and more terrible than ever. But Sandor would never forget the lesson his brother had taught him in the armory. There were no knights, not really. There were only men who wore steel and told pretty lies about honor. Years would pass. The burn scars would heal into a twisted map of pain across the left side of Sandor Clegane's face, pulling his mouth into a permanent sneer, his eye into a weeping, half-closed thing. People would learn to look away when they saw him. They'd call him the Hound in whispers, and he'd make the name his own, wearing it like armor against their pity and disgust. But in the cold hours before dawn, when the ravens still sleep, he would remember being 8 years old and learning that fire burns and brothers lie, and the only person you could trust in this world was yourself. That was the day Sandor Clegane died, in a way. The Hound was born in the ashes. The Red Keep stank of perfume and betrayal, though Sandor Clegane had long since stopped being able to tell which smell was worse. He stood in the shadow of a pillar in the throne room, white cloak hanging heavy on his shoulders, a cloak he'd never asked for, serving a king he despised. Around him, the court of King Joffrey Baratheon played its endless games of flattery and lies, while Sandor watched with the same expression he'd worn for years. Flat, empty, the look of a man who'd stopped expecting the world to be anything but shit. "Dog!" Joffrey's voice cracked across the hall, high and petulant. "Attend me." Sandor moved forward through the crowd of silk-clad lords and perfumed ladies, their eyes sliding away from his scarred face, as they always did. Good. He preferred it when they looked away. It meant they couldn't see the contempt in his good eye. The boy king sat on the iron throne like a child playing at being his father, all sharp edges and cruel smiles. 13 years old and already a monster. Not like Gregor, who'd at least had size and strength to excuse his nature. Joffrey was simply rotten, spoiled fruit dressed in gold and crimson. "Your Grace," Sandor said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. That merchant who petitioned this morning, the one complaining about the taxes on Dornish wine, I want you to find him. Joffrey leaned forward, his green eyes bright with malice. Cut out his tongue. I'm tired of merchants who talk too much. The court had gone quiet in that particular way it did when Joffrey was about to do something especially cruel. Lords and ladies held their breath, waiting to see if the Hound would balk, would refuse, would give them something to whisper about over their spiced wine. Sandor had learned better than that years ago. "As you command, Your Grace," he said, his voice empty of everything but compliance. Joffrey's smile widened. "Good dog, you may go." Sandor bowed, the bare minimum required, and retreated back to his pillar, back to the shadows where men like him belonged. He wouldn't cut out the merchant's tongue, of course. He'd find the man, tell him to shut his mouth and flee the city before dawn. Maybe give him a few coppers from his own purse to speed him on his way. Joffrey would forget by evening, distracted by some new cruelty. It was a game Sandor had been playing for 3 years now, ever since Robert Baratheon had drunk himself to death and left his son on the throne. Keep the boy king entertained. Deflect the worst of his impulses. Protect those who could be protected without getting himself killed. Some game, some life. The Hound has a soft heart. A voice murmured nearby. Sandor's eye flicked to the speaker, a minor lordling from the Reach, dressed in green and gold, trying to impress his companions. For all his scars and snarling, he lets the small folk slip away. Perhaps he's not as fierce as they say. Sandor could have corrected that impression, could have told the lordling about the battle at the Mummer's Ford, where he'd killed 12 men in as many minutes, could have described the way a man's skull splits when you put an axe through it, or the sound a ribcage makes when it collapses under a warhammer. Instead, he turned and looked at the lordling full on, letting the firelight catch the melted ruins of his face. The man went pale and found somewhere else to be. Better to be thought soft than to be known completely. The evening found Sandor in the guard room of the White Sword Tower, cleaning his armor with sand and oil, while the other Kingsguard pretended he didn't exist. They didn't like him. He wasn't a knight, refused to be a knight, wore their white cloak like a prisoner's chains. Still haven't taken your vows, Clegane. Sir Boros Blount sat nearby, his fat face red with wine. 3 years in the Kingsguard, and you're still just a dog in a white cloak. Sandor didn't look up from his work. I kill who needs killing, and guard who needs guarding. The vows wouldn't make me better at either. The vows make you a knight, Sir Meryn Trant said, his voice tight with offence. A sworn brother, a man of honor. That made Sandor laugh, a sound like rocks grinding together. Honor, yes. I saw your honor when you beat that whore on Joffrey's command. Very knightly, Trant. Your mother must be proud. Meryn's hand went to his sword, but Sir Barristan Selmy's voice cut across the room like a blade. Enough. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard stood in the doorway, his white hair catching the lamplight, his face carved from a lifetime of battles and disappointments. He looked at Sandor with something that might have been pity or might have been understanding. It was hard to tell with Barristan the Bold. Clegane, walk with me. It wasn't a request. Sandor set down his cleaning cloth and followed the old knight out into the evening air. They walked in silence along the battlements, the city spreading below them like a cesspit dressed in torchlight. King's Landing at dusk. 1,000,000 souls packed into narrow streets, all of them lying to each other about something. You're wasted here, Barristan said finally. I serve the king. You serve a mad boy who will get you killed for sport one day. The old knight stopped, turning to face him. I've watched you these 3 years, Clegane. You're a better man than you pretend to be. Sandor felt something ugly twist in his chest. You don't know what I am. I know you deflect Joffrey's cruelties when you can. I know you've never struck a child or an innocent, despite what the small folk whisper about the Hound. Barristan's eyes were steady, weighing. I know you refuse knighthood because you watched your brother burn you and then get rewarded with a white cloak and a castle for his service to House Lannister. The mention of Gregor made Sandor's jaw tighten. Sir Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides, butcher of the Riverlands, and sworn sword to Tywin Lannister. His brother had become everything their father had wanted, a knight, a landed lord, a name men spoke with fear, and a monster who killed for sport. My brother is a knight, Sandor said flatly, anointed with oils and dubbed by the High Septon himself. If that's what knighthood means, I'll stay a dog. Knighthood should mean something better, Barristan said quietly. Once, it did. Once, Sandor agreed. Before I learned that knights are just men with swords who tell prettier lies about their murders. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 men in white cloaks looking out over a city Neither of them could save. "Why do you stay?" Barristan asked. It was a good question. Sandor had asked himself the same thing 100 times, usually in the dark hours before dawn, when sleep wouldn't come and the old burn scars ached like fresh wounds. "Where else would I go?" he said finally. "I'm the Hound. This is what I'm good for." Barristan shook his head. "You're good for more than you think, Clegane. One day you'll have to decide if you believe that." Then the old knight walked away, leaving Sandor alone with the night and the city and the weight of a white cloak he'd never wanted. The war came to King's Landing on a night when the Blackwater burned. Stannis Baratheon's fleet filled the bay, hundreds of ships bearing down on the city, while Joffrey cowered in the Red Keep and brave men died on the walls. Sandor stood in the Mudgate tunnel, his armor slick with blood and river water, watching the wildfire turn the bay into a vision of all 7 hells. Green flames danced across the water, consuming ships and men alike. The screaming carried even over the crash of battle, men burning alive, jumping into water that burned as hot as any pyre. The smell was unspeakable, cooked flesh and pitch, and the acrid stink of wildfire that seemed to coat the back of Sandor's throat. "Halfman wants another sortie," one of the gold cloaks shouted. "The Hound's supposed to lead it." Tyrion Lannister, the dwarf who'd been made Hand of the King, was the only one of them with any sense. But even sense couldn't change what Sandor was seeing. The bay burning, the walls crumbling, the battle already lost. And the fire, always the fire. "Dog," Joffrey's voice carried from somewhere behind the lines. "Get out there, kill them all." Sandor looked at the burning bay, at the wildfire eating through ships and stone and flesh, and something inside him that had been bent for years finally snapped. "Fuck the Kingsguard," he said to no one in particular. "Fuck the city. Fuck the king." He turned and walked away from the battle, away from the flames, away from the white cloak and the oaths he'd never taken. Men shouted after him, coward, deserter, craven, but their words meant nothing. He'd killed enough men for Joffrey Baratheon. He'd watched enough cruelty in the name of crown and duty. He was done. Sandor made it back to his quarters in the White Sword Tower, stripped off his bloody armor, and took only what he could carry: his sword, his gold, a skin of wine. The white cloak he left lying on the floor, like a shed skin. The city was chaos, soldiers running toward the walls, small folk running away from them, fires spreading through Flea Bottom, where the wildfire had jumped from the bay. Sandor moved through it all, like a ghost, just another armed man in a city full of them. He was halfway to the river gate when he heard the scream. His first instinct was to keep walking. The city was full of screams tonight. One more wouldn't matter. But something in the pitch of it, young and terrified, made him stop. The alley was dark, but he could make out shapes. 3 gold cloaks, their spears set aside, and a girl no more than 12 pressed against the wall. Her dress was already torn. "Please," she was saying, "please, my father's a baker. He has money." "Don't need money, sweetheart," one of the soldiers said, his voice thick with wine and battle madness. "Just a bit of fun before we all die." Sandor could have walked away. Should have walked away. He wasn't the Hound anymore, wasn't anyone's protector, wasn't responsible for every evil thing that happened in this shithole city. But he'd spent 3 years deflecting Joffrey's cruelties, 3 years trying to be something other than what everyone expected. And maybe Barristan the Bold had been right. Maybe he was wasted being just a dog. His sword was in his hand before he'd decided to draw it. The first gold cloak died before he knew Sandor was there, his throat opening in a red smile. The second managed to grab his spear, but Sandor's blade took his hand at the wrist, and then his head at the neck. The third ran, which was the smartest thing anyone had done all night. Sandor stood in the alley, breathing hard, his sword dripping. The girl stared at him with wide eyes, taking in his burned face and bloody blade. "Go home," he told her. "Bar your door. Don't come out until the bells ring victory or defeat." She nodded once and fled, her torn dress clutching around her. Sandor cleaned his blade on a dead man's cloak and continued toward the river gate. 2 more bodies to add to his count. 2 men who deserved it, for whatever that was worth. Which was nothing. Deserving didn't matter. Dead was dead. He left King's Landing that night, riding through the river gate on a stolen horse while the city burned behind him and Stannis Baratheon's army threw itself against the walls. He didn't know where he was going, didn't care. He only knew what he was leaving. The White Cloak, the Boy King, the pretense that any of it had, ever, meant anything. The Hound rode north into the darkness, and if he looked back at the green flames consuming the Blackwater, he told himself it was only to make sure no one was following. Not because the fire still scared him, not because some part of him was still 8 years old, burning in his brother's grip. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, and for the first time in years, Sandor Clegane had no one to serve and nothing to protect, and no idea what that made him. Just a man with a sword and a scarred face, riding away from the only life he'd known. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like falling. The Riverlands were dying. Sandor Clegane rode through a country that had been bled white by war, fields burned to ash, villages emptied of everything but corpses and ravens, roads turned to mud by the passage of too many armies. 3 kings had torn this land apart, fighting over a chair made of swords, and the small folk had paid the price in blood and hunger. He'd been riding for weeks since fleeing King's Landing, keeping to back roads and avoiding banners of any colour. North, always north, though he couldn't have said why. Maybe because the North was where honourable fools still believed in things like justice and oaths. Maybe because it was far from his brother, far from the Lannisters, far from everything he'd been. Or maybe because a man had to ride somewhere, and north was as good a direction as any. The inn was called the Crossroads, or had been before someone had burned half of it. Now it was just a shell of smoke-stained timber, with a stable that still had most of its roof. Sandor's stolen horse needed rest, and his own belly was empty enough that he'd risk the company of strangers for a bowl of stew. He tied his mount, a decent courser he'd taken from a dead Lannister scout 3 days back, and pushed through the door into dimness and the smell of old grease. The common room was nearly empty. A fat innkeeper who looked like he'd seen too much, a couple of farmers drinking in silence, and a table of men in mismatched armor who had the look of sellswords or broken men. Their eyes tracked Sandor as he crossed to the bar, taking in his size, his sword, the ruin of his face. "Wine," Sandor said, dropping a copper on the bar, "and whatever you're cooking." The innkeeper, his badge said his name was Masha Heddle, though she was long dead and buried, nodded and disappeared into the back. Sandor took his cup to a corner table where he could watch the door and the sellswords both. The wine was shit, but it was wet. The stew was worse, but it was food. He ate mechanically, aware of the sellswords muttering among themselves, weighing whether the scarred man in the corner was worth the trouble of robbing. He almost hoped they'd try. He hadn't killed anyone in 3 days, and his hands were starting to itch for it. Then the door opened, and a girl walked in. She was small, skinny, dressed in boys' clothes that were too large and too dirty. Her hair was cropped short and filthy, her face smudged with mud and road dust. She couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, but she carried herself like someone much older, much harder, and Sandor knew her. He'd seen her at court, always hovering near her father, Lord Eddard Stark. He'd watched her sneak into the training yard to watch her dancing master teach her swordplay. He'd been standing guard the day Joffrey had ordered her father's head struck off while she screamed in the crowd. Arya Stark, daughter of the king in the north, worth her weight in gold to the right buyer. The girl's eyes swept the common room, wary as a cat in a kennel. They passed over Sandor without recognition, the burned face and lack of white cloak, apparently enough to make him a stranger. She approached the bar, her hand resting on the pommel of a sword that was too long for her. "Bread and cheese," she said, her voice low and careful. "And a room, if you have one." One of the sellswords laughed. "Well now, what's a little lord doing out here all alone? Where's your mother, boy?" The girl's jaw tightened, but she didn't turn. "I'm not a boy." "No?" The sellsword stood, and his companions followed. Even better then. Sandor set down his cup with deliberate care. He should let this play out, should let the girl handle her own problems, or fail to handle them, and learn something about the world. He had no dog in this fight, no reason to care if Arya Stark lived or died or got sold to the highest bidder, except she'd watched her father die, same as Sandor had watched his childhood burn. And maybe that meant something. Or maybe he was just tired of watching people take what they wanted from those who couldn't fight back. "The girl's with me," he said, his voice cutting across the room like a blade. All eyes turned to him. The sellsword saw his size, his sword, the professional way he'd risen from his chair. They saw a man who killed for a living, same as them, but bigger and meaner and sober. "Didn't see you coming together," the lead sellsword said, but his hand had moved away from his sword. "You weren't looking careful enough." Sandor crossed to the bar, standing close enough to the girl that she flinched. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the desperate hunger. "Get your bread. We're leaving." Arya Stark looked up at him, and for a moment he saw her trying to place his face. Then recognition flared in her grey eyes, not of who he was now, but of who he'd been. The Hound, Joffrey's dog. Her hand went to her sword. "I wouldn't," Sandor said quietly. "You're fast, girl, but you're not that fast. And these gentlemen would love to watch me gut you." The sellswords were watching with interest now, waiting to see if this would turn into entertainment. The innkeeper had frozen by the kitchen door, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Arya's hand stayed on her sword, but she didn't draw. Smart girl, stupid enough to be traveling, alone in a war zone, but smart enough to know when she was outmatched. "Outside," Sandor said. "Now." For a moment, he thought she'd refuse, would draw her ridiculous sword and force him to either kill her or knock her unconscious. Instead, she turned and walked toward the door, her back straight and proud like the little lady she'd been raised to be. Sandor followed, tossing another copper on the bar. For the trouble. The afternoon sun was harsh after the dimness of the inn. Arya Stark stood by the horse trough, her hand still on her sword, glaring at him with all the fury her small frame could muster. "I know who you are," she said. "You're the Hound. You served Joffrey." "Did," Sandor agreed. "Don't anymore. You were there when they killed my father." "I was. No point in lying about it. Wasn't my choice, but I was there. Then I should kill you." Her hand tightened on her sword hilt. Sandor almost smiled. "You could try. Probably get yourself killed in the process, but you could try." He leaned against the stable wall, deliberately casual. "Or you could tell me what a daughter of Eddard Stark is doing, wandering the riverlands, dressed like a beggar boy. That's none of your concern." "It is, if I'm going to collect the ransom for you." The words hung in the air between them. Arya's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Ransom? You're worth something to someone," Sandor said. "Your mother, maybe. Or your brother, the king. Someone will pay to get you back." He studied her carefully. "Unless you'd prefer I leave you here for those sellswords to find. They'll sell you too, but I don't think you'd enjoy the journey as much." Arya's grey eyes burned with hate, but behind it, he could see the calculation. She was trapped, and she knew it. Couldn't fight him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't talk her way out. "Where are you taking me?" she asked finally. "North. Your brother's at the Twins for some wedding. We'll start there, see if he's still alive after. If not, we'll try the Eyrie. Your aunt's there, isn't she?" "How do you know about the wedding?" "I listen. Soldiers talk. Your brother's marrying his men to Walder Frey's daughters to secure the crossing." Sandor pushed off from the wall. "Now get on the horse before I tie you to it." "I have my own horse." "Where?" Arya's silence was answer enough. She'd been on foot, probably for days. Whatever horse she'd had was gone, stolen, traded, or dead. Sandor untied his courser and swung into the saddle, then reached down. "Come on, wolf girl, we're burning daylight." For a moment, he thought she'd refuse out of pure spite. Then, with visible reluctance, she took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and fury. "If you try anything," she said, her voice low and fierce, "I'll kill you in your sleep." "You're welcome to try," Sandor said, and kicked the horse into motion. They rode north through the dying afternoon, through a landscape of burned fields and abandoned villages. Arya sat rigid behind him, refusing to hold on even when the horse stumbled on the rutted road. "Proud little fool. You'll fall off and break your neck if you don't hold on," Sandor said after the third near tumble. "I'm fine. Suit yourself." They rode in silence for another hour. The sun was setting, painting the smoke-stained sky the color of old blood, when Arya finally spoke. "Why didn't you let them have me? The sellswords?" It was a fair question. Sandor had been asking himself the same thing. "Told you, ransom." "That's not why. Smart girl. Too smart for her own good." "Maybe I'm tired of watching men take what they want from people who can't fight back," he said. "Maybe I'm just bored. Does it matter?" "It matters to me," Sandor grunted. "Your father was the only honest man I ever met in King's Landing. Stupid, but honest. I figure I owe him something for that." "You owe him for standing there while Joffrey had his head cut off." "I wasn't there by choice, girl, and neither was he, in the end." Arya was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My name is Arya, not girl. I know who you are." Then use my name. Sandor almost smiled again. She had her father's stubbornness, this one. And maybe a bit of steel her father had lacked. Fine, Arya. Now hold on before you fall off my horse, and I have to explain to your mother why I'm bringing her a daughter with a broken skull. This time, grudgingly, she did. They camped that night in the ruins of a burned village, using what was left of a stone wall for shelter. Sandor built a small fire, small enough not to draw attention, and roasted the rabbit he'd snared, while Arya watched with unconcealed hunger. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday. Maybe the day before." He tossed her a piece of the rabbit. She caught it and tore into it like an animal, all pretense of high-born manners forgotten. "Slow down, or you'll sick it up again." She ignored him, eating until the meat was gone, and then licking her fingers clean. Sandor ate his own portion more slowly, watching her in the firelight. She looked like a different creature from the girl he'd seen at court. That Arya had been clean and well-fed, dressed in silk and brushed velvet. This Arya was harder, sharper, like a blade that had been beaten into shape by rough use. "What happened to you?" he asked. "After your father died?" Arya's face closed like a door slamming shut. "None of your business." "Fair enough." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that seemed to sum up everything the Riverlands had become. "They killed everyone," Arya said suddenly, her voice small and fierce. "At Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy took it and killed Bran and Rickon. My brothers. They're dead." Sandor said nothing. What was there to say? The world was full of dead children and burned homes. One more tragedy wasn't going to change that. "I have a list," Arya continued, "of people I'm going to kill. Joffrey's on it. The Mountain too. Your brother. And you. I'm on your list. You were. Maybe you still are. I haven't decided." Sandor looked at this scrap of a girl who'd lost everything and somehow kept going, who'd crossed half the Riverlands alone and survived, who could sit across a fire from a man who could kill her with his hands and threaten him with a straight face. "You'll never be a knight," he said, though that wasn't quite what he meant to say. "Good," Arya replied. "I've seen what knights are. I'd rather be something else." And maybe, Sandor thought, that was the smartest thing anyone had said in this whole God's-forsaken war. They took turns sleeping that night, one watching, while the other rested. Sandor didn't trust the girl not to cut his throat in the dark, and she clearly didn't trust him not to sell her to the first Lannister patrol they crossed. It was a start. In the morning, they rode on toward the twins, toward Robb Stark's wedding, toward whatever came next. Neither of them knew that the Red Wedding was waiting. Neither of them knew how much blood was yet to be spilled. But they rode together, the burned man and the wolf girl. And if it wasn't quite partnership, it was at least something more than captor and captive. It would have to be enough. They reached the twins 3 days too late. The castle sat astride the Green Fork like a pair of stone sentinels, its twin towers connected by the water tower and its bridge. From a distance, it looked peaceful enough. Banners flying, smoke rising from cook fires, the river flowing steady and dark beneath the crossing. Up close, the crows told a different story. They covered the ground outside the castle walls in a black carpet, fighting over what was left of the bodies. Sandor had seen enough battlefields to know what he was looking at, even before they got close enough to smell it. A slaughter, not a battle. These men hadn't died fighting. They died trapped, surprised, betrayed. Stay on the horse, he told Arya. For once, she didn't argue. Sandor dismounted and walked among the dead, his boots squelching in mud turned red-black with old blood. Northern men, most of them. He could tell by their armor, their weapons, the direwolf badges some still wore. Robb Stark's army, or what was left of it. He found one man still wearing a crown, what had been a crown before someone had taken an axe to his head. The direwolf crown the king in the north had worn. Sandor crouched beside the body, studying what was left of the face. Not Robb Stark. Too old, wrong build. Some poor bastard they'd dressed up as a decoy, maybe. What happened here? Arya's voice was small, distant. Sandor straightened, looking back at her. She sat on the horse like a statue, her face blank with the kind of shock that came before the screaming started. Your brother came to a wedding, he said flatly. The phrase gave him the traditional gift. He's not dead. Her voice had gone high and thin. He can't be dead. Probably is. The phrase don't do things halfway. Sandor walked back to the horse, his boots leaving bloody prints. Your mother too, most like. Anyone fool enough to trust Walder Frey's guess right. Arya was shaking now, her hands white-knuckled on the horse's mane. You're lying. You're lying because you want what? To hurt you. Sandor grabbed the reins, started leading the horse away from the field of corpses. I'm telling you the truth, girl. Your brother's dead. Your mother's dead. Your father's dead. Your whole fucking family's dead. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can figure out what comes next. I'll kill them. Her voice had gone flat, empty. I'll kill them all. Get in line. They rode away from the twins in silence, Arya's breath coming in short, sharp gasps that might have been sobs, or might have been the prelude to something worse. Sandor kept the horse moving, putting distance between them and the slaughter, watching the girl out of the corner of his eye for signs she was about to do something stupid. When they were a mile clear, she finally spoke. Where are we going? The Eyrie. Your aunt's still there, far as I know. She'll pay for you. I don't want to go to the Eyrie. Don't much care what you want. Arya twisted in the saddle, her grey eyes blazing. Then let me go. You don't need the ransom. Just let me go and I'll... You'll what? Wander the Riverlands until you starve, or get raped or sold? Don't be stupid. I'm not stupid. Then stop acting like it. Sandor pulled the horse to a stop, turned to face her properly. Listen to me, Arya Stark. Your family's dead. Your home's gone. The only thing keeping you alive right now is that you're worth gold to someone. Once that changes, you're just another orphan in a war zone, and orphans die. So yes, we're going to the Eyrie, and yes, your aunt's going to pay me, and you're going to smile and say thank you because it beats the alternative. I hate you. Good. Hate's useful. Keeps you warm at night. He kicked the horse back into motion, and after a moment, Arya settled behind him again, rigid and silent. They rode like that for hours, through country that grew more desolate with each mile. The Riverlands were a corpse now, picked clean by armies and bandits both. As the sun began to set, Sandor found them shelter in an abandoned farmhouse, roof mostly intact, walls solid enough. He built a fire in the hearth while Arya sat in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at nothing. Eat, he said, tossing her some dried beef from his pack. She didn't move. Starving yourself won't bring them back. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. This time she looked at him, and the emptiness in her eyes was worse than anger. Why do you care? I don't. But dead girls don't fetch ransoms. It was a lie, and they both knew it. If he'd only cared about the gold, he would have sold her to the Lannisters weeks ago. But Sandor had spent too many years watching people break, watching cruelty destroy whatever was soft in them. And maybe he was tired of it. Or maybe he just saw something in this wolf girl that reminded him of himself at 8 years old, burning in his brother's grip. They'll pay for it, Arya said quietly. Everyone who did this, the Freys, the Lannisters, all of them. Maybe, or maybe they'll die old and fat in their beds, and you'll die young and angry in the mud. That's how the world works, girl. Not for me. Sandor almost smiled. No, maybe not for you. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Hard riding, cold camps, the constant wariness of traveling through country where every man was a potential enemy. Sandor taught her things without meaning to. How to build a fire that didn't smoke, how to set snares for rabbits, how to sleep light and wake ready. And in the evenings, when they'd found shelter and eaten and the darkness pressed close, sometimes they talked. Why do they call you the Hound? Arya asked one night. Sandor was sharpening his sword, the steady rasp of stone on steel a familiar comfort. Because I was the king's dog, did what I was told, bit who I was pointed at. But you're not anymore. No. Why did you stop? He considered lying, giving her some easy answer about honor or conscience. But lies were for knights, and he'd never been one of those. Because the king told me to go die in a fire, and I decided I'd rather not. You're afraid of fire. It wasn't a question. Sandor's hand stilled on the whetstone. Yes, because of your face. Because my brother held my face in a brazier when I was 8 years old. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Burned half my head off because I played with one of his toys. Then everyone lied about it, and he got to be a knight anyway. Arya was quiet for a long moment. The mountain did that to you? Sir Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides, the king's own sworn sword. Sandor went back to sharpening his blade. That's what knights are, girl. Men who burn children and get rewarded for it. Not all of them. Name me one who's any different. She couldn't, and they both knew it. My dancing master was different, Arya said finally. Syrio Forel. He taught me to fight, to be brave. He died protecting me from the Kingsguard. Then he was a fool. He was brave. Same thing. Sandor looked up from his blade. Brave men die just as dead as cowards, Arya. Sometimes faster. At least they die for something. And what's that worth when you're bleeding in the mud? Arya's jaw tightened. Everything. Sandor grunted and went back to his sharpening. The girl was a fool, same as her father, same as all the Starks. But maybe the world needed fools. Someone had to believe in things, even if it got them killed. A week into their journey, they stopped at a small inn. Barely more than a common room and a stable, but it had hot food and ale. Sandor was nursing his second cub when Arya returned from the privy, her face tight and pale. There are men outside, she said quietly. Lannister men. Sandor's hand went to his sword. How many? 4, maybe 5. They're watering their horses. He could leave her here, slip out the back, be gone before the Lannisters knew he was there. It would be smart, safe, the kind of thing a man with sense would do. Instead, he stood and crossed to the window. 5 men in Lannister crimson, their armor dusty from the road. One of them was laughing, telling some story about a village they'd burned. Another was pissing against the stable wall. And one of them was wearing armor Sandor recognized. A breastplate with a three-headed dog, poorly painted but unmistakable. He'd seen that armor before, on a Lannister sergeant named Polliver, the same Polliver who'd taken Arya's sword, Needle, after her father's arrest. Sandor looked at the girl. She was staring at the men with an expression he'd seen before, on his own face, in the mirror, when he thought about his brother. "That's Polliver," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He has Needle, my sword. John gave it to me. Forget the sword. It's mine. It's steel. Steel can be replaced." Not that steel. Arya's hand had gone to the wooden training sword she still carried, the one her dancing master had given her. "I want it back." Sandor should have said no, should have grabbed her and ridden out the back way before the Lannisters finished watering their horses. Should have done the smart thing. Instead, he found himself asking, which one has it? Polliver, the one with the dog on his chest. Sandor studied the men again, counting weapons, looking for weaknesses. 5 against 1. Bad odds, even for him. But they were tired from the road, half drunk already from whatever they'd been drinking before stopping here. And they wouldn't expect trouble from a burned man and a child. "Stay here," he said. "I want to..." "Stay. Here." He fixed her with his good eye. "You want your sword back, I'll get it. But you'll stay out of the way and not get yourself killed. Understood?" Arya nodded, though her expression said she wanted to argue. Sandor finished his ale, checked his blade, and walked out into the afternoon sun. The Lannister men looked up as he approached, hands moving toward weapons. Polliver, the one with the dog on his chest, grinned. "Well now, what's this? A big ugly bastard looking for trouble?" "Not looking for trouble," Sandor said. "Come to give you a message." "Oh, from who?" "From Arya Stark, about her sword." The name hung in the air for a moment. Then Polliver's grin widened. "The little wolf bitch, she's alive?" He looked at his companions. "There's good gold for her head. Where is she?" "She's not giving up her head," Sandor said. "Just wants her sword back, the one you took from her in King's Landing." Polliver's hand went to the thin blade at his belt, a child's sword, too small for a man. "This? Finders keepers, friend. Now fuck off before I..." Sandor's blade was out and through Polliver's throat before the man could finish his threat. Blood sprayed across the inn-yard as the sergeant fell, clutching at his opened neck. The other 4 Lannister men froze for a heartbeat, the heartbeat that meant the difference between life and death in a fight. Sandor didn't give them a second one. His sword took the nearest man in the belly, driving up under his ribs to find his heart. The third managed to draw his blade, but Sandor's boot caught him in the knee, shattering it, and his sword finished what the boot had started. The last 2 ran. Sandor let them go. He wasn't interested in men who ran. He bent and pulled Needle from Polliver's belt, wiping the blood on the dead man's cloak. It was a good blade, well made, the kind of thing you gave to someone you cared about. When he turned back to the inn, Arya was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide. "You killed them. You wanted your sword." He tossed her Needle. She caught it, her hands trembling, and for a moment she just stared at the blade, like she'd found a piece of home in all this blood and mud. "Thank you," she said quietly. Sandor grunted. "Don't thank me. Just get on the horse." Those two who ran will be back with friends before dark." They rode hard for the rest of the day, putting distance between themselves and the inn. When they finally stopped, Arya practiced with needle until her arm shook, working through the forms her dancing master had taught her. Sandor watched from the fire, cleaning blood from his blade. "You are holding it wrong," he said finally. Arya lowered the sword. "What?" "Your stance. It's all wrong for real fighting. Syrio taught me. Syrio taught you to dance. I'm teaching you to kill." He stood, picked up a stick from the woodpile. "Again, and this time, pretend I'm trying to gut you. Because next time, whoever you're fighting will be." She hesitated, then nodded. They trained until full dark, Sandor correcting her stance, her grip, her footwork. She was quick. He'd give her that. And she learned fast. By the time he called a halt, she was moving with more confidence, more purpose. "Better," he said. "Not good, but better." Arya was panting, sweat running down her face despite the cold. "Will you keep teaching me?" Sandor looked at this wolf girl who'd lost everything and kept fighting anyway, who'd walked through a country at war and survived, who wanted nothing more than to learn how to kill the people who'd hurt her. He should say no, should drop her at the Eyrie, take his gold, and ride away. But maybe that wasn't what she needed, and maybe, for the first time in his miserable life, he could be something other than a dog who bit on command. "Yeah," he said. "I'll teach you." Arya smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since the twins. It changed everything, that smile, and neither of them knew it yet. The woman in armor appeared like a ghost from the morning mist. Sandor saw her first, a warrior in plate mail, a sword across her back, moving through the trees with the careful grace of someone who knew how to fight. Blue eyes in a broad, freckled face. A woman built like a man, tall and strong, with none of the softness court ladies wore like perfume. "Stay behind me," he told Arya. "Who is she?" "Trouble." They'd been traveling for weeks now, working their way east toward the Vale, living on what Sandor could hunt or steal. Arya had grown harder in that time, faster with her sword, quicker to see threats, less likely to complain about cold camps and hard ground. She was becoming something dangerous, this wolf girl, and Sandor had started to think of her as something other than a ransom. That was his first mistake. The woman in armor stepped into the clearing where they'd camped, her hand resting easy on her sword hilt. She had the look of a knight about her, that particular kind of stupid honor that got people killed. "Sandor Clegane," she said, her voice deep and steady. "The Hound. Don't use that name anymore. You're still wearing the face." Her blue eyes flicked to Arya. "And you have Arya Stark." Arya's hand went to needle. "Who are you?" "Brienne of Tarth. I swore an oath to your mother to bring you and your sister home safely." The words hung in the cold morning air. Sandor watched the woman carefully, looking for the lie, the trap. But all he saw was earnest stupidity, the kind of honor that believed in oaths and ladies and doing the right thing, the kind of honor that got you killed in the Riverlands. "Her mother's dead," Sandor said flatly, "murdered at the Twins, along with her brother and most of the Northern Army." Brienne's face went pale, but she didn't flinch. "Then I'll bring her to her aunt, Lady Lysa Arryn, in the Vale. That's where we're headed. Then you can leave her with me. I'll see her safe." Sandor almost laughed. "You'll see her safe. You're wandering the Riverlands alone, dressed like a knight, carrying a Valyrian steel sword. Every bandit and broken man for 100 miles will try to kill you for that blade. And you think you can keep her safer than I can. I don't rape little girls or sell them for gold." The words were a slap, delivered with quiet conviction. Sandor felt something ugly twist in his chest. Anger, maybe, or something worse. "Neither do I." "Then why is she with you?" "Because I found her half-starved and alone and kept her from getting sold to the Lannisters. Because I've been keeping her fed and teaching her to fight and making sure she doesn't get herself killed." Sandor's hand moved to his sword. "What have you been doing for her, woman, besides making promises to dead ladies?" Brienne's jaw tightened. "I gave my word. Your word's worth shit if you're dead. I can protect her. So can I." They stood facing each other across the clearing, two warriors who'd both decided the girl was worth fighting for. Sandor could see Arya watching them, her grey eyes moving between them, calculating. "Arya," Brienne said, not taking her eyes off Sandor. "Come with me. I swore to your mother. My mother's dead." Arya's voice was flat. "The Hound's right. Your oath doesn't matter anymore." "It matters to me." "Well, it doesn't matter to me." Arya stepped closer to Sandor, her hand still on Needle. "He's taking me to my aunt. We don't need you." Brienne looked like she'd been struck. "I'm not leaving you with him. He's a killer, a dog who served the Lannisters." "He was a dog," Arya said. "Now he's something else, and he's kept me alive when no one else gave a shit." The words shouldn't have meant anything. Sandor had heard worse, been called worse, been treated worse. But something in the way Arya said it, like she actually believed it, made his chest tight. "I can't let you take her," Brienne said quietly. "Then you'll have to go through me." Brienne drew her sword, Valyrian steel, dark and beautiful and worth more than most castles. Oathkeeper, he'd heard it called. A knight's blade for a woman playing at being a knight. Sandor drew his own blade, good castle-forged steel that had killed more men than he could count. "Don't do this," Arya said, her voice sharp with something that might have been fear. "Both of you, just stay back," Sandor said. Brienne moved first, coming in fast and high, her blade whistling through the air where Sandor's head had been a moment before. She was good, better than good, trained, disciplined, strong enough to make her size an advantage. But Sandor had been fighting since before she was born. He slipped her neck strike, countered with a low cut that she barely blocked. Their blades rang together, Valyrian steel against common iron, and the shock of it ran up Sandor's arm. She drove him back with sheer strength, her face set in grim determination. "I don't want to kill you," she said. "Good. Makes it easier for me." They fought across the clearing, blades flashing in the morning light. Brienne was everything a knight should be. Honorable, skilled, fighting for something she believed in. And Sandor was everything a knight wasn't. Brutal, practical, fighting to win by any means necessary. She caught him across the ribs with a cut that would have killed a slower man. He returned it with a kick to her knee that made her stumble. She recovered, pressed the attack, drove him back toward the trees. And for the first time in years, Sandor Clegane was fighting someone who might actually beat him. It should have scared him. Instead, it felt almost good to fight someone worth fighting, to test himself against someone who wasn't just a boy in armor or a drunk with a sword. They broke apart, both breathing hard. Blood ran down Sandor's side from the cut across his ribs. Brienne's knee was swelling where he'd kicked it. Yield, she said. Let me take her. Please. No. They came together again, harder now, desperate. Sandor fought like he always had, dirty, brutal, using every trick he knew. He tried to bite her ear, got her in a headlock, threw dust in her eyes. Brienne fought clean, honorable, the way knights were supposed to, and it was the honor that beat him. She locked his blade with hers, got inside his guard, and drove her shoulder into his wounded ribs. Pain exploded through Sandor's side, white-hot and blinding. He staggered back, his boot caught on a root, and he went down hard. Brienne stood over him, Oathkeeper at his throat. Yield, she said again. Sandor looked up at her, at the earnest stupidity in her blue eyes, at the woman who'd actually beaten him in a fair fight. He should yield, should let her take Arya, collect whatever was left of his pride, and ride away. Instead, he spat blood and said, "Fuck yourself." Brienne's blade pressed harder against his throat. "I'm giving you a chance. Don't want it." He saw her hesitation, saw the moment when her honor warred with her common sense. That's when he made his move, grabbed her blade with his bare hand, ignoring the pain as it cut deep, and drove his boot into her wounded knee. She went down with a cry, and they were rolling in the dirt, grappling like animals, all technique abandoned for raw desperation. Sandor got his hands around her throat. Brienne drove her thumbs into his eyes. They broke apart, both bleeding, both exhausted. And that's when Brienne drew a dagger and drove it between his shoulder and his neck, down into the meat where nothing vital lived, but everything hurt. Sandor roared, his hands loosening, and Brienne tore free. She stood, swaying, her sword gone, her armor dented and bloodied. "Stay down," she gasped. "Please, just stay down." Sandor tried to rise, but his body wouldn't obey. The dagger was still in him, and everything was going distant and cold. He could see Arya standing at the edge of the clearing, her face white with shock. "Arya," he said, though it came out as a whisper. "Run." But Arya didn't run. She stood there, frozen, as Brienne limped toward her. "Come with me," Brienne said, reaching out. "I'll keep you safe. I swore to your mother." Arya's face twisted with something ugly and desperate. She looked at Brienne's outstretched hand, then at Sandor bleeding in the dirt. Then she turned and ran into the trees. Brienne started after her, then stopped, looking back at Sandor. He could see the conflict in her face. Chase the girl or finish the man. "Go," Sandor said, tasting blood. "She needs you more than I need dying." Brienne hesitated one more moment, then ran after Arya, her armor crashing through the underbrush. And Sandor was alone. The pain came in waves, each one worse than the last. The dagger was still in him. He could feel it grinding against bone when he tried to move. His ribs were broken, maybe worse. His hand was cut to the bone where he'd grabbed Oathkeeper. He was going to die here, in a clearing in the Riverlands, killed by a woman who fought with honor. There was something funny about that, but he couldn't quite find the laugh. Time passed strangely. The sun moved across the sky, or maybe it was the same hour repeating. Sandor drifted in and out of fever, seeing things that weren't there. His father's disappointed face, Gregor's hands pushing him toward the fire, Joffrey's cruel smile, Arya's grey eyes watching him fall. He thought he heard voices at one point, men talking in low tones. He tried to call out, to ask for water, but his throat wouldn't work. Then there was a face above him, old, weathered, kind. "Still alive," the man said, surprised. The Seven must have plans for you yet. Fuck the Seven, Sandor managed. The old man smiled. Perhaps, but they've sent me anyway. He was a Septon, Sandor realized, through the fever haze. Brown robes, a seven-pointed star hanging on a cord around his neck. One of those holy fools who wandered the riverlands trying to bring comfort to the dying. Can't help me, Sandor said. We'll see about that. The Septon. No. He said his name was the elder brother, had helpers. They lifted Sandor onto a litter, and the movement sent fresh waves of agony through him. He passed out somewhere during the journey, grateful for the darkness. When he woke, he was somewhere warm and dry. A small room, a straw mattress, the smell of herbs and healing. The dagger was gone from his shoulder. His ribs were wrapped tight. The elder brother sat nearby, reading from a book by candlelight. Welcome back, he said when he saw Sandor's eyes open. We weren't sure you'd make the journey. Where? The Quiet Isle, a place of peace and healing. The elder brother closed his book. You were left for dead in the Riverlands. Do you remember? Sandor remembered. The fight, Brienne, Arya running away, Arya leaving him. The girl, he said. Was there a girl? No girl, just you, dying in the dirt. The elder brother leaned forward. Do you know why you're alive, Sandor Clegane? The Hound. No, the Hound died in that clearing. You're something else now. The old man's eyes were steady, certain. The question is, what? Sandor closed his eyes. His whole life, he'd been something. Second son, bodyguard, killer, the Hound. He'd been Gregor's victim, Joffrey's dog, the thing people feared and despised. But maybe the elder brother was right. Maybe that Sandor had died in the clearing, killed by a woman with honor and abandoned by a girl he'd tried to save. Maybe this was something new, or maybe it was just another kind of dying. Either way, he was too tired to care. He slept, and in his dreams, he saw Arya's face turning away, choosing the uncertainty of the forest over the certainty of staying with him. And for the first time since he was 8 years old and burning in his brother's grip, Sandor Clegane wept. The Quiet Isle sat in the Bay of Crabs, like a prayer spoken in stone and silence. Sandor woke on his third day there to the sound of nothing. No shouting, no steel on steel, no screaming. Just the lap of water against the shore and the distant cry of seabirds. It was the quietest place he'd ever been, and it made his skin crawl. The elder brother came at dawn, as he had each morning, carrying broth and bread. You're healing well, he said, settling onto the stool beside Sandor's bed. The fever's broken, the wounds are clean. Another week, and you'll be strong enough to walk. Sandor took the broth, sipped it carefully. His throat still felt like someone had dragged a blade across it. Then what? Then you choose. Choose what? Whether to keep dying or to start living. The words made no sense, but then nothing about this place made sense. The brothers who tended him never spoke. They'd taken vows of silence, the elder brother explained. They grew their own food, fished their own waters, lived apart from the wars and cruelties of the mainland. Like the world, could be escaped just by not talking about it. I should go, Sandor said. I've got business. Do you? The elder brother's eyes were knowing, ancient. What business does a dead man have? I'm not dead. The Hound is. I saw him die in that clearing, killed by his own pride and pain. The question is whether Sandor Clegane can learn to be something else. Sandor wanted to tell the old man to fuck off, to save his sermons for someone who believed in them. But the words wouldn't come, because maybe the elder brother was right. Maybe the hound had died in that clearing, and what was left was just nothing. Just a burned man with nowhere to go. "I don't know how to be anything else," he said finally. "Then learn." The elder brother stood. "When you're strong enough, join us in the work. No words, no names, no past. Just the work of living. You might be surprised what you find." 2 weeks later, Sandor stood in the monastery's graveyard, a shovel in his hands, digging. The brothers buried their own dead here. Simple graves, unmarked, save for a stone at the head. They also buried the bodies that washed up on their shores, sailors lost at sea, refugees from the wars, anyone the tide brought them. The work was endless, quiet, back-breaking. It was the first honest work Sandor had done in his life. He dug in silence, matching the rhythm of the brothers around him. They didn't speak, didn't question, didn't judge. They just worked. And when the work was done, they prayed. Sandor didn't pray. He'd given up on the 7 when he was 8 years old. But he stood with them during their devotions, his head bowed, his hands still smelling of fresh earth. There was something clean about it, something pure. Dig the hole, lower the body, cover it with earth. Say the words, or in his case, just stand silent while others said them. Then dig another hole. No killing, no cruelty, no one asking him to be a dog or a monster or anything but a man with a shovel. Days turned to weeks. The shoulder wound healed to an angry pink scar. His ribs knit together, still tender but functional. His hands, soft from months of riding and fighting, grew calloused again from gripping the shovel. The brothers called him the grave digger, though they didn't call him anything aloud. It was just understood. The big man with the burned face who worked the graveyard. No questions asked, no past examined. For the first time since he'd fled King's Landing, Sandor slept through the night without reaching for his sword. One morning, he found the elder brother sitting by the shore, watching the sun rise over the water. "May I join you?" Sandor asked. The old man gestured to the sand beside him. Sandor sat, awkward with the informality of it. He'd spent his whole life standing while others sat, waiting for orders, keeping his distance. "You've been here 2 months now," the elder brother said. "Do you plan to stay?" "Don't know." An honest answer. The elder brother smiled slightly. Most men would have fled by now. The silence, the work, the discipline. It's not for everyone. It's quiet. Yes. They sat in silence for a while, watching the waves roll in and out, eternal and indifferent. "I failed her," Sandor said suddenly. The words surprised him. He hadn't meant to speak them. "The girl, Arya Stark. I was supposed to get her to safety, get paid. That was the plan. And I started to care, started to teach her things, started to..." He trailed off, not sure what word to use. Started to hope, started to think he could be something other than a monster, started to think it mattered. It did matter. She ran away from me, chose to run into the woods alone rather than stay with me. That's what I am to people, something to run from. The elder brother was quiet for a long moment. "When I was a young man, I fought in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. I killed men, many men. I told myself I was doing it for duty, for honor, for my house. But the truth was, I liked it, the killing, the power of it." Sandor looked at the old man, trying to imagine him young and bloodthirsty. "One day, I killed a boy. Couldn't have been more than 14. He'd taken up his father's sword when I killed the father, and I cut him down without thinking. Afterward, I looked at his face, really looked, and I saw what I'd become. Not a knight, not a warrior, a killer of children. So you came here? Not right away. First, I tried to go back to who I'd been before, but that man was dead, killed in a muddy field with a boy's blood on his hands. The elder brother turned to face Sandor. So I came here, laid down my sword, took vows, learned to dig graves instead of fill them. And that made it better? Made the dead boys stay dead? No, nothing makes them stay dead. I see them still, in my prayers, in my dreams. The elder brother's voice was steady, accepting. But I can choose what I do with that burden. I can let it destroy me, or I can carry it and still try to do some good in the world. Sandor looked back at the water. I don't know if I can do that. The girl ran from Brienne of Tarth as well, you know. We heard the story from some small folk, both of you fighting over her like dogs over a bone. She ran from both of you. Because we're both monsters. Or because she's a child who's lost everything and doesn't know who to trust. The elder brother stood, brushing sand from his robes. You taught her to fight, Sandor. You kept her alive. You gave her a chance to survive in this world. That's not nothing. It's not enough. It never is. But it's what we have to offer. Our broken selves, trying to do better than we did before. The months passed, like water through his hands, steady, inevitable, carrying away the man he'd been and leaving something else behind. Sandor learned the rhythms of the quiet isle. Dawn prayers, morning work, midday meal in silence, afternoon labor, evening contemplation. The brothers grew vegetables in careful rows, fished with nets and patience, tended their small herd of goats. He learned their names without speaking them. Brother Clement, with the twisted leg, who tended the garden. Brother Narbert, who managed the kitchens. Brother Gillum, who was barely more than a boy and smiled at everything. He learned to find peace in the repetition, the shovel biting earth, the body wrapped in simple cloth, the prayers spoken over strangers who'd never know the kindness of a proper burial. Each grave was the same, and each was different. Each death mattered to someone, somewhere, even if no one living remembered them here. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about Arya, wondered if she'd made it to her aunt, wondered if she was safe, or if she was still running, still learning to kill, still adding names to that list of hers. He hoped she was alive, hoped she was harder and stronger and more dangerous than any man who tried to hurt her. He hoped she'd forgotten him. One evening, as the sun set red across the bay, the elder brother found him in the graveyard, finishing the day's work. A raven came today, the old man said, from King's Landing. Sandor's hands tightened on his shovel. What does that have to do with me? The trial. Cersei Lannister's trial for the murder of the High Septon. The faith has called for trial by combat. Sandor said nothing. His brother was the Queen's champion. Everyone knew that. Sir Robert Strong, they called him now, though the whispers said Gregor Clegane had died and been brought back by dark sorcery. A monster in armor who never spoke, never ate, never raised his visor. Still a monster, either way. They need a champion for the faith, the elder brother continued. Someone who can stand against the mountain. Plenty of fighters in Westeros. Not many who could beat him. Not many who have reason to want him dead. The old man's eyes were steady. Not many who are already dead, officially speaking. Sandor drove his shovel into the earth and left it standing there. No, you don't even know what I'm asking. You're asking me to go back, to pick up the sword again, to be the Hound. He shook his head. I'm done with that. Are you? Or are you just hiding? The words stung like a slap. I'm not hiding. I'm trying to be better than I was. Better than a killer. Better than your brother. The elder brother stepped closer. Sandor, I'm not asking you to go back to being the Hound. I'm asking if you are ready to be something new, a man who fights not for kings or gold, but because it's right. Because there's a monster who needs killing, and you're one of the few men alive who can do it. I've spent months learning to dig graves instead of fill them, learning to live without violence. And that's good. That's important. But sometimes the world needs men who can do violence on behalf of those who can't. The elder brother's voice was gentle, understanding. The faith needs a champion. The people need someone to stand against Cersei Lannister and her creature. And you need to face your brother, not for revenge, but for closure, for justice. Sandor looked out across the graveyard, at all the graves he'd dug, at the peace he'd found in this quiet place. It wasn't enough. The elder brother was right. He'd been hiding from the world, from his past, from the man he'd been, and the man he might become. He'd learned to find peace, but peace wasn't the same as purpose. And his purpose, it seemed, was waiting for him in King's Landing. If I do this, he said slowly, I'm not doing it for the faith, not doing it for honor or glory or any of that horseshit. Then why? Sandor thought of Arya running through the trees, thought of Sansa Stark trapped in King's Landing with Joffrey, thought of all the people his brother had killed over the years, the small folk, the children, the innocents who'd been in his way, thought of himself at 8 years old, burning. Because someone should have killed him years ago, he said. Because I'm the only one who might actually do it. Because, he paused, searching for the right words. Because I learned here that I'm not just a killer. But that doesn't mean I can't kill when killing's needed. The elder brother nodded slowly. Then you have my blessing and my prayers. Keep your prayers. I'll need something more useful. What's that? Sandor looked at the old man, at the peace he'd found, and was about to leave behind. Tell me that if I die doing this, there's a grave waiting for me here. Not the Hound, not Sir Gregor's brother, just Sandor Clegane, the grave digger. You have my word, the elder brother said quietly. Whatever happens, there's a place for you here. It was enough. 2 days later, Sandor stood at the dock, ready to leave the quiet isle. The brothers had given him simple clothes, a bit of silver, and a sword. Not his old blade, but a good one, nonetheless. The elder brother walked with him to the boat. One more thing, the old man said. When you face your brother, and you will face him, remember, you're not fighting to become the better killer. You're fighting to prove that men can be more than their worst moments, that redemption is possible, even for those who've done terrible things. What if I lose? Then you die knowing you tried to be something better than you were. The elder brother smiled. That's more than most men can say. Sandor stepped into the boat, feeling the water shift beneath him. The quiet isle was already receding, becoming just another shape on the horizon. He'd found peace there, found purpose, found a version of himself that didn't need to be the Hound. But the world didn't need the gravedigger right now. It needed the one man who could stand against the mountain and fight not with hate, but with something that looked almost like honor. As the boat carried him back toward the mainland, and whatever came next, Sandor allowed himself one last look at the quiet isle. Then he turned his face toward King's Landing, toward his brother, toward the end of a story that had started with fire 30 years ago. This time, he wouldn't be the one who burned. King's Landing stank of fear and rotting ambition, but Sandor Clegane had smelled worse. He entered the city through the Gate of the Gods, just another sellsword in worn leather and road dust, his face hidden beneath a hood. The guards barely glanced at him. They were too busy watching for northern armies, or Targaryen dragons, or whatever fresh hell was coming next. The city had changed since he'd fled the burning Blackwater. The great sept of Baelor dominated the skyline now, its crystal towers catching the light like swords. The Faith militant walked the streets openly, their 7-pointed stars marking them as the High Sparrow's men. And everywhere, whispered like a curse, was the name Cersei Lannister, the queen who'd armed the Faith and then tried to destroy it. The queen whose champion was a monster in white armor, who never spoke, never ate, never showed his face. The queen whose trial would decide whether the Faith still had power in Westeros, or whether lions and gold would grind everything to dust. Sandor made his way through the winding streets to the great sept, where the Faith's representatives were quartered. He was expected. The elder brother had sent word ahead by Raven. But the Septon who met him still looked surprised when Sandor pulled back his hood. 7 savers, the man breathed, staring at the burn scars. You're really him. I'm really somebody, Sandor said. Whether that's who you think I am is another question. The elder brother wrote that the Hound died in the Riverlands. He did. Then who are you? Sandor considered the question. Once, he would have said he was Gregor's brother, Joffrey's dog, the burn boy who learned that knights were liars. Now, I'm the man who's going to kill Sir Robert Strong, he said. That's all that matters. The High Sparrow received him in a plain chamber beneath the sept, surrounded by candles and the smell of incense. The man was ancient, weathered like old wood, wearing the simple robes of a common septon. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, the eyes of someone who'd toppled queens with nothing but faith and words. Sandor Clegane, the High Sparrow said. The Hound. I'm told you died. I got better. The old man smiled slightly. The elder brother speaks highly of you, says you found peace on the Quiet Isle, says you learned to value life instead of taking it. I learned some things, and yet here you are, come to kill. Sandor met the High Sparrow's gaze steadily. There's a difference between killing because you can and killing because you must. I spent my whole life doing the first. Figure it's time to try the second. And you believe Sir Robert Strong must die? I know what he is. I know what he's done. Sandor's jaw tightened. And I know he's my brother, brought back from death by Qyburn sorcery to serve as Cersei's creature. So yes, he must die. The High Sparrow studied him for a long moment. The Faith needs a champion, it's true. Someone who can stand against the mountain. But I must know. Are you fighting for the Faith or for yourself? Does it matter? It matters to me. Sandor looked at the candles flickering around them, at the 7-pointed stars carved into every surface, at the faith this old man had in gods who'd never answered any prayer Sandor had spoken. I'm fighting because there are people in this city who can't fight for themselves, he said finally, because my brother's been killing and raping and burning for 30 years, and someone should have stopped him long ago, because the woman he serves is poison and her rule is a blight. He paused. And because I'm the only man alive who might actually beat him. Not for the 7, then. Fuck the 7. They never did shit for me. The High Sparrow laughed, a dry, papery sound. An honest answer, at least. Most men would have lied, claimed piety they don't feel. He stood, his joints creaking. Very well, Sandor Clegane. You'll be the faith's champion. But know this. If you fight for us, you fight under our banner. You represent something larger than yourself, the common people who've been stepped on by lords and ladies for too long. I'm not a symbol. Every champion is a symbol. The question is what you choose to represent. Sandor thought of the quiet isle, of digging graves in silence, of learning that he could be something other than the Hound. He thought of Arya's grey eyes watching him fall, of the peace he'd found and was about to shatter. I represent the idea that monsters can be killed, he said. That's all. That, the High Sparrow said quietly, may be enough. The trial was set for 3 days hence, in the ruins of the old dragon pit. The High Sparrow wanted the small folk to see it, wanted them to witness the faith's champion strike down Cersei's creature, wanted them to believe that justice still meant something in Westeros. Sandor spent those 3 days preparing. The faith's armourer brought him plate, good steel, well fitted, with the 7-pointed star emblazoned on the breastplate. Sandor accepted it without comment, though the symbol felt wrong on his chest. He wasn't fighting for the 7, but if it gave the small folk hope, he'd wear it. The sword was another matter. We have fine blades, the armourer said, showing him a rack of weapons. Casterly rock steel, some of them, sharp as... No. Sandor pointed to a simpler blade in the corner. A greatsword, plain and functional, with a worn leather grip. That one. But sir, it's just a... That one. The sword felt right in his hands. Balanced, honest, a tool for killing rather than a trophy to display. He worked with it for hours, relearning the weight, the reach, the way it moved through air. The brothers at the Quiet Isle had kept him strong with manual labor, but fighting was different. Fighting required a specific kind of strength, a specific kind of madness. He found both waiting inside him, rusty but intact. On the 2nd day, a visitor came. Sandor was in the training yard behind the sept, working through forms, when a voice called out, "Still too slow on your left side, dog." He turned, his blade rising, and found himself facing a dwarf in fine clothes, flanked by 2 gold cloaks who looked deeply uncomfortable. Tyrion Lannister smiled his crooked smile. "I'd heard you were dead. I'm delighted to see the reports were exaggerated." "Tyrion," Sandor lowered his sword. "Come to wish your sister well? Come to see if the rumors were true. The Hound returned from death to fight the mountain. It's almost poetic." Tyrion limped closer, his mismatched eyes studying Sandor carefully. "You look different, thinner, older, almost peaceful." "I was, for a while. And now? Now I'm doing what needs doing." Tyrion nodded slowly. "You know you'll probably die. My sweet sister's creature is formidable. 8 feet of undead muscle and steel, with no mind left to feel pain or fear." "I know what he is." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, this looks suspiciously like suicide with extra steps." Tyrion's voice softened. "If you're looking to die facing your brother, there are easier ways." Sandor set down his sword, wiped sweat from his face. I'm not looking to die. I'm looking to make sure he does. There's a difference. Is there? Because the Sandor Clegane I knew didn't care much about justice or righteousness or any of that nonsense. He just wanted to survive. Maybe that Sandor died. Sandor looked at the dwarf who'd been the only person in King's Landing to treat him like a human being. Or maybe he just learned there are things worth dying for. Such as, Sandor thought about it, proving that someone can stand up to monsters, showing the small folk that lords and ladies can bleed like anyone else, giving people hope that the worst things in the world can be killed. Noble sentiments. My father would have despised you. For them, good. They stood in silence for a moment, the dwarf and the burned man, two outcasts from noble houses who'd both learned that nobility was a lie. The girl, Tyrion said finally. Arya Stark. I heard you had her for a while. Sandor's jaw tightened. I did. Is she alive last I saw? She ran from me in the Riverlands, chose freedom over safety. He picked up his sword again, needing something to do with his hands. Smart girl. She'll survive, if anyone can. You cared about her? It wasn't a question, but Sandor answered anyway. Yeah, I did. Then fight for her, Tyrion said quietly. Fight for all the Aryas in this city who need to see that monsters can be beaten. Fight for the small folk who think the gods have abandoned them. Fight for yourself, if nothing else. Prove you're more than what Gregor made you. I'm not a hero, Tyrion. No. But you might be something better. A man who does the right thing despite having every reason not to. The dwarf turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Sandor, try not to die. It would be inconvenient for my betting pool. Despite everything, Sandor almost smiled. The morning of the trial dawned grey and cold, with clouds hanging low over King's Landing like a funeral shroud. Sandor rose before dawn, dressed in his armor piece by piece, each strap and buckle a meditation. The breastplate with its 7-pointed star, the gauntlets that would let him grip his sword, the helmet he wouldn't wear. He wanted Gregor to see his face, wanted his brother to know who was killing him. The Septon came to offer prayers. Sandor declined. If the Seven wanted to help, they could give him strength. If not, he'd do it himself. The walk to the dragon pit took an hour, the streets lined with small folk who'd come to watch. They called out as he passed, blessings, prayers, curses against Cersei. One woman threw a flower that landed at his feet. For luck, she called. Kill the monster. Sandor picked up the flower, a simple thing, blue and white, and tucked it behind his breastplate. For luck, for remembrance, for all the people who needed him to win. The dragon pit loomed ahead, its ancient domes cracked and weathered. This was where the Targaryen dragons had been chained and slowly died, their fire smothered by stone and ambition. Fitting place for a trial by combat, fitting place to kill his brother. The High Sparrow met him at the entrance. Are you ready? As I'll ever be. Then go with the Seven's blessing. And remember, you fight not just for victory, but for justice. Sandor said nothing. He'd never cared about justice before. But maybe that was changing too. The interior of the dragon pit was vast and echoing, open to the sky where the roof had collapsed. Thousands of small folk filled the stands, their faces eager and afraid. In the royal box sat Cersei Lannister, beautiful and terrible, her green eyes fixed on the arena floor. And across from Sandor, waiting in the center of the space, stood the Mountain, Sir Robert Strong, 8 feet of white armor, a great sword that would have been a two-hander for any normal man, but looked like a toy in his hands. The helmet sealed, no eye slits visible, no sign of humanity beneath the steel. But Sandor knew his brother's stance, the way he held his shoulders, the particular menace of his presence. "Gregor," he said quietly, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "It's me, your little brother, the one you burned. Remember?" The mountain didn't respond. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe whatever Qyburn had done had burned away everything human, leaving only the monster. Either way, it didn't matter. The High Sparrow's voice rang out, announcing the terms of the trial. Cersei's guilt or innocence would be decided by the gods through combat. The Faith's champion against the Queen's champion, to the death. Sandor barely heard it. His focus had narrowed to the armored giant before him, to the moment 30 years in the making. The horn sounded, the mountain charged. For something so big, Gregor moved with terrifying speed. His first swing would have taken Sandor's head off if he hadn't rolled aside, the greatsword whistling past close enough to feel the wind of it. Sandor countered with a cut to the mountain's knee. The joints were always weaker, but his blade skittered off the white armor without leaving a mark. Qyburn had done his work well. The armor was exceptional, fitted perfectly to the mountain's monstrous frame. Sandor would have to be better. They circled each other, the crowd roaring above them. The mountain attacked again, a series of heavy overhead blows that Sandor parried and dodged, feeling the impact of each strike jar through his arms. Gregor was stronger, had always been stronger, but strength meant nothing if you couldn't land a hit. Sandor slipped inside the mountain's guard, drove his blade toward a gap in the armor at the armpit. Gregor twisted, and the blow glanced off, but Sandor felt the sword bite flesh beneath. First, blood. The mountain roared, a sound like an animal, inhuman and full of rage. His counterattack came faster, more savage, and Sandor barely got his shield up in time to block a blow that drove him to his knees. Pain exploded through his left arm. The shield was cracked, maybe his arm too. He rolled away, came up on his feet, favoring his right side. The crowd was screaming, but he couldn't tell if they were cheering or condemning. "You remember?" Sandor shouted, his voice raw. "You remember burning me? I was 8 years old, Gregor. 8. And you held my face in the fire because I played with your fucking toy." The mountain came at him again, and this time, Sandor didn't dodge. He stepped into the charge, used Gregor's momentum against him, guided the greatsword past, and brought his own blade up in a vicious cut across the mountain's helmet. The white armor split. Something dark leaked out. Not blood, but something else. Thick and foul-smelling. Whatever Gregor had become, he could still be hurt. They broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least Sandor was breathing hard. The mountain's chest didn't move. Dead men didn't need air. "I spent my whole life being afraid of you," Sandor said, circling. "Being angry, being broken. You made me the Hound, Gregor. You made me into something that bit whoever pointed me at a target, but I'm not that anymore." The mountain charged again, and this time Sandor was ready. He sidestepped, brought his sword down on the back of Gregor's knee with all his strength. The armor held, but the joint buckled. The mountain stumbled, went down on one knee. Sandor pressed the advantage, strike after strike, targeting the joints, the gaps, the weak points. His damaged arm screamed in pain, but he ignored it. Blood ran into his eyes from a cut on his forehead he didn't remember receiving. The mountain rose, swinging wildly, and caught Sandor across the ribs. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him flying. He hit the ground hard, tasted blood, felt something crack inside his chest. "Get up," he told himself. "Get up or die here." He got up. The mountain lumbered toward him, his armor dented and leaking, his movements slower now. Damaged, dying, if something already dead could die again. "You want to know the difference between us?" Sandor said, spitting blood. "You were always a monster. You liked hurting people, liked watching them burn and scream and break. Me?" He raised his sword. "I became a monster because of you, but I learned to be something else, learned that I could choose." The mountain swung again, a massive overhead blow meant to crush Sandor into the ground. Sandor stepped aside, let the greatsword bite earth, and brought his own blade down on the back of Gregor's neck with every ounce of strength he had left. The armor cracked. The blade bit deep, something vital severed. The mountain of Clegane fell to his knees, his greatsword falling from his hands. Sandor circled in front of him, looked into the sealed helmet where his brother's face should be. "I forgive you," he said quietly, and he was surprised to find he meant it. "Not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying you." Then he drove his sword through the eye slit of the helmet, through whatever was left of Gregor's brain, and finished what should have been done 30 years ago. The mountain fell. The crowd erupted. Sandor stood over his brother's corpse, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen wounds he couldn't feel yet. His left arm hung useless. His ribs were definitely broken. He might be dying, but Gregor was dead. Finally, truly, completely dead. The High Sparrow was descending from the stands, his face radiant with triumph. "The gods have spoken. The Faith's champion has won. Cersei Lannister is guilty." The crowd took up the chant. "Guilty, guilty, guilty." Sandor didn't care. He dropped his sword, staggered to the edge of the arena, and let the septons catch him as he fell. He woke 3 days later in a bed that smelled of herbs and healing. The elder brother sat beside him, just as he had months ago on the quiet isle. "Welcome back," the old man said. "We weren't sure you'd make the journey." "Am I on the quiet isle?" "You are. The High Sparrow had you brought here after the trial. Said you'd earned your rest." The elder brother smiled. "You won, by the way, in case you were wondering. The Queen has been arrested. The mountain is dead. The Faith has been restored to power. You did what you set out to do." Sandor looked down at himself. His left arm was splintered. His chest was wrapped tight. He hurt everywhere, but it was the clean hurt of healing rather than the sharp hurt of dying. "Arya," he said, "have you heard?" "Nothing, but absence of news is often good news in times like these." Sandor nodded, let his head fall back against the pillow. He'd done what he could for her, taught her to fight, kept her alive, shown her that surviving meant more than just not dying. The rest was up to her. "What now?" the elder brother asked. "Will you stay here? Return to digging graves?" Sandor thought about it. The peace of the quiet isle was still there, waiting for him. He could go back to the silence, the work, the slow healing of a broken soul. But he'd learned something in the dragon pit, facing his brother. He'd learned that he could choose to fight not out of fear or anger or the need to survive, but because it was right, because there were people who needed protecting and monsters who needed killing. He'd learned that honor wasn't about vows or oils or 7-pointed stars. It was about choosing to do the hard thing because someone had to. "I'll stay for a while," he said. "Heal up, dig some graves, find some quiet, and then I'll see if there are any more monsters that need killing, any more Aryas who need protecting." He looked at the elder brother. "I'm not the Hound anymore, but I'm not just the gravedigger either. I'm something else, something in between." "A knight without the vows," the elder brother said. "A warrior without the lies. A man who's learned that redemption is possible, even for those who've done terrible things." "Something like that." The old man stood, patted Sandor's good shoulder gently. "Then rest, Sandor Clegane. Heal. When you're ready, the world will still be waiting. There's always another monster to fight, always another innocent to protect. I know. But for now, let yourself be just a man who survived, who faced his demons and won, who found honor in his own way, on his own terms." The elder brother left, and Sandor was alone with his thoughts and his wounds and the knowledge that he'd done something that mattered. He'd killed the monster who'd made him. He'd proven that even the worst things in the world could be beaten. He'd found, in his own brutal way, something that looked almost like honor. It wasn't redemption, not completely. The things he'd done, the people he'd killed, the cruelties he'd committed, those would never be erased. But maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about carrying it and still choosing to be better. Sandor closed his eyes and let sleep take him. When he woke, he'd dig graves, he'd heal, he'd learn to use his left arm again. And when the time came, when he heard about some monster terrorizing the small folk or some wolf girl in trouble who needed a gruff bastard with a sword to watch her back, he'd ride out again. Not as the Hound, not as Ser Gregor's brother, just as Sandor Clegane, a man who'd learned that the hardest battles weren't fought with swords, but with the choice to keep fighting when it would be easier to stop. In the distance, the bells of the sept rang out, calling the faithful to prayer. Sandor didn't pray, but he listened to the bells, and he thought of Arya somewhere out there, learning to dance with death, and he smiled.